closing of English theatre in 1642, it ended a glorious phase of English drama. So this is what we people have seen, that in 1642 there was a complete shutdown of the English drama. The theaters were, so that is what we people have seen, that there is a kind of a continuous decline in the plays or in the performance. On one hand, we can say that it can be a kind of a reason that the Puritan repression of 1642 to 1660, so that can be considered as one of the major reason why there was a kind of a decline. And now when we people are talking about the new word, so there was a kind of an a kind of a method, or there was a kind of an age, and that was something where we people can say that the Victorian phase, the romantic phase, where poetry came into existence. There was a kind of a shift from uh, the the kind of the romantic era, from the nature, from the common people. And then there was a kind of a movement, and that movement can be considered as one of the greatest movement in the period in the history of English literature. And that there was a concept of the new theatre, and that was during the modern period. So here now the play which we people are going to study is one of the very beautiful play which was being written during the time of the Shaw, and the name of that play is Pygmalion. So in the meanwhile, I will be sharing my slide. So please do let me know that if my slides are visible or not. I hope the slide is visible to you. Is it visible?
Yes, yes, it is visible.
Yeah, mom.
Okay, so today we are going to start up with a new topic, and the topic is Pygmalion, which is being written by George Bernard Shaw. So, here, first of all, let me give a brief background of G.P. Shaw. So, whenever we people are talking about George Bernard Shaw, so Shaw was born in Dublin, and that was around 1856. So, he has spent maximum of his years there in Dublin. Apart from that, there is a kind of a concept which Shaw has developed, and that is where we people are talking about Pygmalion. So, Pygmalion is one of the most popular play, as well as one of his most straightforward one. So, the form has none of the complexity, and this is where we people have found that the idea of Pygmalion is very profound, where we people say that that Shaw's Pygmalion was first of all performed in the year 1930, and in 1956 the musical version of Pygmalion, which is being called as My Fair Lady, it was something which was being staged on it was something which was being staged. Apart from this, another thing where we people are talking about this play. So in 1964, there is a film which is starring Auden Hepburn. It was released, and the film went on to win 8 Oscars, including the Best Picture award. So there, what we people have seen that there were so many kind of the developments on the English drama from 1660 to the Shaw's time, where we people are talking about that the certain kind of the changes. There was a kind of a concept, and that concept is something where we people are talking about the more modern form, because in 1913 we people, as we people are aware, that was the time period of first uh, the war. So that is where it started up with this kind of a history. And if we people are talking about more of the works of GB Shaw, so that is what we people have seen, that the other works which are being written by GB Shaw are Man and Superman, Major Barbara, Back to Mestola, Saint John. So at least there are plenty and plenty of plays which are being written by GB Shaw. Apart from that, where we people are talking about Pygmalion. So Pygmalion is something which comes up with a kind of an approach, and the approach is as where we people are talking about a problem play. So here in this play, George Bernard had used humor and a lively characterization to explore about the New England. So in terms of the language, whether it is in the term of the class structure, whether it is in the term of an education, or whether it is the gender. So all these things were the major kind of the things which were being present in the Pygmalion. So first of all, if I talk about that, what this Pygmalion is. So the concept of Pygmalion is something which is being taken from the Greek theater or the Greek tragedy, where the Greek theater where there was a character, and the name of the character is Pygmalion. So he is a man, and he's the king as well as he's the sculptor. He made a kind of a sculpture, and when he made this kind of a sculpture, so he made a kind of a woman, and that was a kind of an ivory statue, and that was so pretty, so beautiful, that Pygmalion fell in love with that girl. So finally, what he does, he has never created such kind of a masterpiece, and on seeing that picture of that uh, that girl, he actually fell in love. And then what he did, he decided to uh, ask the god. He asked the god, and that is God Aphrodite. And there, what he has done, he mentioned this thing that first of all, what I will do, I will. He asked that please bring this girl into light. So finally, God listens to his prayers, and the girl was someone, that ivory statue was something which was turned into a kind of a monument, or into a kind of a lively structure. So that is what we people have seen. And then finally Pygmalion got married to this girl. So the name of the statue which Pygmalion had done, he has given Gelita to that sculpture of his. So this was a kind of a happy ending. The same idea is something which was being taken by George Bernard Shaw. And as we people are aware that George Bernard Shaw was one of the greatest playwright of the 20th century. Maximum time, his plays are something which are being considered as the problem plays and the plays of the idea. So where we people are talking about what a problem play is. So the plays are a kind of a discussion of a problem that was very, very close to the playwright heart. So since the myth which he has taken, the idea of the myth which he has taken is from the Greek legend, and that is Pygmalion, where he has taken the story. So that story he has recreated, and that is why he has given the title Pygmalion to this play. So what does it explore? It explore on one concept, that here what are the problems during that time in England? So the problems which were prevalent in the society, and what is the possible solution, was something which can be considered as the crux of his play. So here, because there were so many problems, like we people can say about the language, we people can say about the class structure, the education, as well as the gender. So all these kind of the problems are something which are being reflected by his play, and that is Pygmalion. Again, where we people are talking about the women characters. So the women characters in his plays are more impressive than men. And in Pygmalion, Eliza Doolittle is a poor girl who wants to earn her livelihood by selling the flowers. And the play also is a kind of a discussion on a language which is employed by the varied strata of the society. So the language which is being seen here is can be considered as a dividing line between the two segments of the society. When we people are talking about the class structure of the England, so this is how the class structure is being divided. The class structure is something which is being divided into the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class. So upper class are the elitist, where we people can say these are the kings and the queens or the bureaucrats. Middle class are the kind of the people who are the businessman, and on the other hand we have the working class, and this is something which can be considered as the lower level. So now the class structure which he has given, or which we people have seen in England, so that is what we people can say, that here there is no entrance. That means if someone belongs to the upper class, the middle class people cannot approach to the upper class, the lower class people cannot approach to the middle class, and vice versa. So that is how there was a kind of a demarcation which is being done. So whenever we people are talking about the Shaw, why he was saying all these, why we people have seen these kind of the things, because even if we people are talking about Shaw, who can be considered as one of the greatest playwright of the 20th century, he had a very high opinion about W.S. Gilbert and Oscar Wilde. So G.B. Shaw was someone who was very, very influenced by Ibsen, and that is why Shaw started as an exponent of realism and a determined incalculator of the play of ideas. So when we people are talking about the Shaw, so here Shaw wrote well-known social traps. So on stage, Shaw's plays represented a kind of a social propaganda. And even if we people are talking about the style of the Shaw, he believed in a kind of a creative evolution, and he believed that the progress of a mankind to the higher and higher level. So that is what was something which can be reflected over here. So if we people are talking about the Pygmalion, the play itself, so the Pygmalion is something which is being subtitled. So there is a subtitle in Pygmalion, and the subtitle with Pygmalion is A Romance in 5 Acts. So that is how the structure of Pygmalion is being divided. So here, this is what we people have seen, that in Act 1, different strata of the society seeking shelter in rain under the portico of a church in London because of the rain. So here Eliza Doolittle is a poor girl, but she is proud flower girl with a Cockney accent. So here she's the heroine. What we people can imagine, as I gave you the myth of the Greek, one of the Greek legend, and that is Pygmalion, where the Pygmalion was the king and he constructed a kind of a sculpture and he fell in love with that girl. And finally, he asked the god that please bring life to this girl. So finally, what happened? The gods listened to his prayers, and the girl, the that statue was something which was being transformed into the girl. So the same kind of a idea is something which is being represented over here. So the girl Galita, which was being taken in a Greek myth, is something which is being represented by Eliza Doolittle. So here she belongs to a very poor family, and Cockney accent is something where it plays a kind of a role, that pronunciation is something which is very, very important. The language is something which is very, very important. People who belong to the upper class, so they were very fluent with the English language. On the other hand, the people who belong to the lower class were not well versed with this kind of a language. So he is that is what he has projected with Eliza Doolittle. So here, the situation which we have seen in Act 1, we have seen that so many society people, it is raining outside and there are so many people who are there inside the church of the London, and it is just because of the rain. And there is a little flower girl who is trying to sell flowers to the people who are gathered under the church. There is a person who is a note taker. A note taker is taken by a cop, and the people under the portico tell the flower girl that her activities are being followed by this cop. So the flower girl pleads before the note taker that she is a good girl. So here, the person who is taking notes on this girl is Professor Higgin. So Professor Higgin is someone who belongs to a high society, and he is an expert in phonetics. On the other hand, the cop who is present over there is Colonel Pickering. So Colonel Pickering is a kind of a person who is also a master in linguistic. He has mastered in Sanskrit language, and he is an expert in Indian dialects. So Colonel Pickering has come to meet Higgins, and the flower girl comes to Higgins to place later on and offers him. So here, when these two people are uh, these people are discussing something. So Higgin is someone who is working on an experiment. So Henry Higgin can be considered as an arrogant and insensitive linguistic professor. He doesn't have a heart. He doesn't have any kind of an emotion. And when he is having a kind of a conversation with this Colonel Pickering, so they both of them they just turn into a kind of a bet, and what they say that this girl can be a part of their experimentation, this flower girl, and Henry Higgins says that I will teach him English language. I will teach him phonetics. And once she will be very well versed with this kind of phonetics, then I will present her to the upper class people. So that was a part of his experiment. And uh, this Elizabeth. Eliza Doolittle was knowing nothing about that kind of a thing. Okay? And the flower girl, she just comes to the Higgin and offer, and that is the time when Professor Higgin offer him her money, and he says that I will teach you to speak better English in order to enable her to work on the flower shop. So Higgin intends to teach her the language of a gentle class and to pass her off as a duchess in an ambassador party. So that was a prime agenda of Higgin. So that is why this girl was something which can be considered as the flower girl, that is Eliza Doolittle, is taken by Higgin as his pupil for a few month. So that is what we people have seen. So Higgin has decided to take the girl on a professional challenge, and he boasts his associate, one of his associate, that is Colonel Pickering, that within 6 months I will give certain kind of the lesson that Eliza could be passed off as any kind of a duchess. So here, when we people are talking about this play, that is Pygmalion. So Pygmalion can be viewed as a kind of a feminist text. So here, what we people see that Eliza Doolittle is a flower girl, and she is an illegitimate daughter of Alfred Doolittle, who displays no responsibility towards her. And Eliza sells flowers and she earns her livelihood all by herself. So, the basic idea of Shaw is to draw our attention to the lot of children who are born out of wedlock and then abandoned to live their own. So that is why here what we people can say that this play can also act as a kind of a problem play. So that is where, and since Eliza was someone, she was governing her own system all by herself. She was running all by herself. She was not getting any kind of an education. So there is a kind of a line in the play which in which she says that I ain't got any parents. They told me that I was big enough to earn my living and turn me out of the house. So she was an abandoned kind of a child. So here, this is what we people can have seen, that a destitute Eliza can be considered as a marginalized character who is further treated with humiliation by Professor Higgin, and Shaw has considered that poverty to be the root of all the kind of the atrocities in the society. So according to him, it was not possible to live a good life without money. And Eliza Doolittle, being poor, consider cleanliness itself to be a virtue. So that is why Eliza goes to Professor Higgins. So in the meanwhile, when Eliza is there with this Professor Higgins, what happens? She wants to learn this kind of the phonetics, but it was something which was very difficult for her. And although she wants to learn, but there is a kind of a tension between her and Higgins, because the Higgins was very, that means he was not very good with this girl. So that is what we people have seen. So here, as in Pygmalion, every word he can speak to Eliza is a direct attack on her essential femininity. So that is what we people have seen, that even Eliza, when he brings Eliza to his own house, he says that Eliza is required to be bathed by Mrs. Pierce, Higgins' housekeeper, and Higgins called Eliza as her monkey brand. So again, this can be considered. the kind of the particular utterance and the statements which are being mentioned over here. So Pygmalion is something which represents a language experiment by Higgin as a scientist in phonetics. So language is something which is embedded in a certain, which embedded a certain set of rules as employed by Higgin to teach the language of phonetics. So here the language of a gentle class to a flower girl that he is confident would pick up so-called that language of the upper class society. So that is where we people have seen that somewhere he just wants that she should learn a kind of a language, and that means a kind of a transformation of a lower class girl to the upper class, and that is only through the medium of a kind of a language, and that is where uh, she could also own a kind of a respect for herself. So here, if we just people see the character, so this is what we people have seen that even she also wants to be treated with respect as a person. So here, Higgin, as I said, that he was a kind of a man who doesn't have any mercy. So he, however, persists in treating her as a project and as an object. So that is what we people have seen over here in the whole play. So under the unwritten rule of our society, a language adopted by the kings and queens and the upper class nobility is termed as gentle, whereas the language of a lower strata of a society is unacceptable kind of a discourse as much as their presence within the society. So this is what we people have seen. There is a kind of a class distinction. That means, on one hand, the people who belong to the upper society and the lower class society are someone who are always marginalized because they do not have any kind of a sense. And that is why they are being called as the kind of the people who with whom these people should not sit. So in the play, Eliza Doolittle, the flower girl, belonged to a category of a lower class people who are kept at an arm length, so called by the upper class. And so, no doubt, Higgin is shocked that Eliza produces such as certain kind of the word she has learned. And finally, later on, she starts learning English with this man. So finally, because she was a very quick learner, so she learned everything very easily. So here, what we people have seen that is as regulated set of the statement combined with in a very predictable way. So that is what we people have seen that here the word which were being used by Eliza were incomprehensible to the others, but the way of her talking was something which can be considered as a very different. So after once she has learned all the kind of the pronunciations, so he just wanted to take a test. So in order to take a test, Eliza was someone, she was being taken to the upper class house, and there she was there, supposed to attend a kind of a party, and she started uh, having a kind of a conversation. Once she started a conversation, so the language of the upper class, what we people have seen that it, according to our society, it is according to the unwritten rule which is being found is something which can be considered as a kind of a knowledge. So the words which were being used by Eliza were incomprehensible, and that was the time period that when she went to that kind of a social gathering, people started making fun of her. And her ways of talking is loved by the people who have a better control over language. So it is defines that what can be said, studied, and the process of doing so. So in this context in which the meaning itself is produced. So here the greatest impression or the upper class is given a greater importance, and so is their language. So if we just look towards the if we just look towards what are the major conflicts which are being presented over here in the play, so that is what we people have seen, that status is something which is being divided. It is divided, that means yes, there are upper class and the lower class. So lower class can never take the position. Upper class have their own mannerism, and that is how they project it. There is a kind of a social snobbery, there is a kind of a conflict, and these conflict can be anything. That means even people will tease them. So when everyone was making a kind of a fun of this girl, they went to a kind of a house, that is Mrs. Pierce house. So finally, what happens? There was a girl, and her name was. There was a boy. His name was Freddie. So Freddie, on seeing this girl, he fell in love, and that is why he came to protect this girl. Somewhere, Freddie, like all the youths, he belonged to an educated, good kind of a society because he has done a kind of a schooling. So somewhere, Elizabeth, this girl, that is Eliza and Freddie, they fell in love with each other. On the other hand, uh, when we look further with the play, so this is what we people have seen, that in Pygmalion, people like Eliza and Alfred Doolittle are the ones who are powerless, owing their economic status, which makes itself visible for the moment when they open their mouth. So, as everyone was making fun of this girl, this Eliza. So she felt bad. So that is self-consciousness. So that is where she was not able to understand, and that is what we people have seen, that even if we people are talking about Michael Foucault, so he is talking about the discourse. So the discourse construct and legitimize unequal power relations. So all these are something which can be considered as one of the major part in the powers. So here this play also presents a story of unequal power relation between Higgins and Eliza. Even though she becomes her pupil, that means she becomes a student of Professor Higgins, and she is a quick learner. But Higgins never ever for once forget her lowly life and treats her as a poor flower girl throughout the play. So that is what we people have seen, that the power position, the kind of a conflict which is being there. And that is where we people have seen that there is a kind of a subjugation of the section of the society through this kind of a particular discourse. Higgins looked down upon Eliza, although later is quick enough to handle his appointment and good at doing every little errand of her master. So specific institutional forms of control were created to ensure that these sections remain subjugated. So that is why he always wanted to keep her in a kind of a marginalized position. So that is how, as I was telling you earlier, that if we just look towards the play, so that is where what this girl wants, she only want to earn a kind of a self-respect, and that self-respect is something which is not being given to her. And that is how this is being run, something which is being reflected over here, that the nature of the class structure, the upper class, the middle class, and the working class. So that is where we people have seen that Professor Higgin, Colonel Pickering, Mrs. Higgin, Mrs. Clare, and Freddie. All these are someone who can be considered as the upper class people. They represent the upper class society. The middle class society are Mrs. Pierce. She represents the middle class morality alone. And in many ways, that is also of a quality of a Higgin and Colonel Pickering class. And the lower working class, which we people have seen, is Eliza and Alfred Doolittle, and his never seen but often heard about a wife, and that is Eliza's stepmother. So that is how we people have seen that even if we people are talking about the bystanders in Act 1, does not take time to think that the note taker is a cop who might be following the activities of the flower girl, as she is being a low born, where she was being bound to be an objectionable character. So even the people who were standing in front of the church, they also looked at her as that she has done something wrong. That is why she is being followed by the cops. So even the society doesn't wait for a single moment to realize this girl that she belongs to that kind of a manner. So the beginning of the play is a reminder where the flower girl is warned that she is being followed by the cop owing to her status as others present in the same place belonged to the better section of the society. So, and she is at once alarmed and terrified. And what she says in return, she just says that I'm a respectable girl. I have not done anything. And she always says that I'm a good girl. Good girl means, please quote, good girls means she is trying to sell flowers to earn her living. So that is what we people have seen. And even these kind of the discourses are thus the manifestation of a will to power, where the structures of power in society retain their power over the marginal and the subordinate through the creation and control of a particular discourse. Even though Eliza is able to learn better English and she is desired, but her status is being marginalized, remains till the end. And she fails to gain any word of respect from Higgin. Where we people are talking about Higgin, Higgin brands that all young women, uh, he just calls them as idiots. So that is what he is using. And that is where we people have seen. So this is something which is every now and then it is being repeated. So in the meanwhile, when Higgin is trying to teach her, and Eliza is also there with Professor Higgin. So somewhere what happens, she tries to maintain her dignity, and after a while, she learns this kind of a language. And in the end, when she is being allowed, and she is being represented in a form of a duchess, and she is allowed to attend the party of the ambassadors, so nobody is able to recognize her. She has learned plenty of mannerism. She can project herself, and even the kind of the phonetics, that means even the kind of the words which she is speaking, is somewhere that she cannot be considered. Everyone thought that she belonged to the upper society, upper class people. So somehow Eliza realizes that she is a part of an experiment, and Higgin is someone who is just trying to mock her. He's just trying to trouble her. So finally, Eliza thinks that I should leave this man's place. And when she was leaving that place, she just says one thing. That means On one hand, the English lessons make Eliza much more equipped for look for a better opportunities in life. And on the other hand, when she was leaving, when she realized that what this man is all about, why he is talking about all these kind of the people, so finally what she does in the end, she just threw her slippers at Higgins, and when we just look it further, it can be considered as both in a form of her frustration as well as her resistance. Because Higgin is someone who fails to read Eliza's heart. And that is why, because every time, whenever he used to look at her, he used to look at her in a form of a poor gutter girl. So that is what he used to mention her. And if we just look towards the character of Eliza, so that is what this is what we people have seen, that she's a protagonist and she's a poor flower girl who wish to be rich and happy. On the other hand, she is actually illegitimate daughter of Alfred, and she becomes an experiment to the subject of Higgin and Pickering. And that is where Higgin just wanted that even the lower class people, if they are being allowed to learn these kind of the language, underprivileged people can be raised up. So that is something which we people have seen in the play, and that is in the play Pygmalion. So language um, plays a very important role because in Pygmalion, language learning does not make Eliza a society girl because her status of belonging to a low class stand is such. So, but Foucault uh, argues that the production of a knowledge is not wholly oppressive, rather, the production of information does help in changing the status quo of marginalized. So, Eliza acquires the said language very effectively to the purpose that Higgins teaches her, so that she also decides to leave Higgins and marry Freddie, who belonged to the better class of the society than hers. So that is what we people have seen. And somewhere she doesn't want it to go back to the state of her lower class life. And but this can be considered that this is where she belongs. She thought that both of them are going to open a flower shop of their own, and this is the betterment, and it take place after her resolute fight with Higgins, whom she calls as a selfish brute. And Eliza is fearful and very thought of going back to the low place from where she was brought as an Higgins experiment. So now, since she has learned these kind of the language, the phonetics of the upper class, Elisa finds herself unfit to sell flowers because now she cannot do that kind of a work. So she cannot change her inner characteristic to suit the newly changed outer appearance. And she argues with Higgins on the subject, and she is able to stay true to herself and not to conform to please society. So this is where it is being mentioned that where we people are talking about uh, that now she doesn't want to fit into that kind of a society. So here, what does it shows? It shows that knowledge can be considered as an abstract force, and our endeavor should not be about increasing the quantum of the knowledge, but instead it should be the knowledge which produces fact. So Eliza, after being trained in a language, is considered superior and is able to involve a better person and come in terms with her life. So that is what we people have seen, that when we people are approaching towards the end of the play, she is no more deprived. She is no more considered as an other. So Eliza finds herself better equipped to face her life, and that too in her own terms. So that is what we people have seen with the character of Eliza. So, on one hand, if we compare it with the character of Mr. Higgin, so Mr. Higgin can be considered as one of the antagonists of the play, and he is someone who can be considered as the professor of phonetics, who is trying to teach the Eliza the proper way of the society. So that is where we people have seen what is the relation. That means he's friend to Pickering and wishes to be friends with Eliza. And that is what we have seen. The conflict is something where he tries to change Eliza's personality, but she won't let him. And that is what we people have seen, that there is a kind of a mistake. That means he is the one who is not able to understand a female. That kind of a imbalance is something which we people have seen. Where we people are talking about the imbalance. So imbalance can be considered imbalance in terms of the power which results in inequalities and disequilibrium. So this inequality in Pygmalion is one of the class which results in disequilibrium, and on the other hand, where we people are talking about the knowledge, so knowledge is shown to be a centralized in the hands of a wealthy and educated. So here, sure, in terms of he being the playwright, so playwright voices his demand for imparting of knowledge to the underprivileged for the betterment of the society. So that kind of a class conflict where we people can say that the marginalized are someone who are supposed to be suffer, and they are the one who are supposed to be subjugated. So that is something which he never wanted. Shaw never had this kind of an idea, and that is where he has presented this kind of a play where he wanted to bring a kind of where he's thinking for a betterment of the society. When we people are talking about Eliza, it is she is put under the circumstances to learn to speak a language, and not Mr. Higgin parting with the alphabets to make to live with a Cockney dialect, and put under the circumstances of which Eliza is a part of Higgins want to satisfy his whim of winning a bet by presenting poor Eliza as a duchess by teaching her to a good genteel tongue. So that was just a kind of a bet for this man, and that kind of a bet which he has done with this Colonel Pickering, that I can change this girl. I can make her speak, learn the upper class language. But the central idea of this play is something which is talking about the mobility. The mobility means there should be no any kind of a class distinction. That means that means even the upper class people, if they had a kind of an education, so they should learn it, and somewhere it aspires everyone to, even it aspires the lower status people to rise to the higher levels by the way of their earnest effort. So that is not something which is there, which should be there with the upper class society. It can be for the lower class people also. So, and when we people are talking about Colonel Pickering, so that is what we people have seen, that even though he is a kind of a friend to Higgin, but he is also a friend to Eliza, just like a father-like figure. And he is trying to get Eliza and Higgin to understand each other. But there is a kind, because as I was telling you earlier, that where we people are talking about Professor Higgin. So Higgin can be considered as a man who is very, very insensitive, so he is not able to understand. There is another character which is being presented on the play, and that is Mrs. Pearcey. So Mrs. Pearcey can be considered as a motherly figure for Eliza because the first she's the housekeeper in Mr. Higgins' house, and that is what we people have seen. And she is the one who always protect Eliza and keeps Higgin in line. And that is where we people can say that she can also be considered as a role model for Eliza because every time she is there to help her. And why? Because even Mrs. Spears say belongs to the same kind of the class to which Elisa also belonged. So that is what we people have seen. So again, Higgin, when we people are talking about the Higgin, so Higgin represent the institution of a polished language and succeeds in providing the language of a gentle class to a girl who never had a kind of an opportunity to read a book in her life. So if it's just people in Pygmalion, Higgin is the institution through Eliza English in better, who teaches Eliza English in a better tongue, and it is something which is being passed on to a girl of a poor class. Eliza, as she is a very fast learner, so that is how she was able to learn that kind of a language easily, and somehow she utilizes it to best of her abilities to land up in a better section of the life, much opposite to what Higgin never wanted. He always wanted that every woman, when we people are talking about GB Shaw, so George Bernard Shaw, so Shaw has created his women ideally very, very different. They are someone who have a voice of their own. They know how to fight. They not fight like not something like where they can fight for their own rights. They are intelligent and they had certain kind of the abilities which can utilize them, which they can utilize in order to present themselves in a different manner. So that is what we people have seen in display. Apart from this, uh, in the next slide, we have seen uh, the another character, and that is Mr. Freddie Hill. So Freddie Hill is an ideal image of a man at the time of Eliza, and he has certain kind of the feeling for Eliza. And finally, this is what we people have seen that in the end of the play, they marry, and he also argues with the people of his society on his choice of Eliza. And he is the only one who gives hope to Eliza during the time of her adversary. So that is what we people have seen. So even though when we people are talking about this kind of a play Pygmalion, the ending, that means where Freddie marries Lisa, creates a kind of a controversy during that time period, the time period of the Shaw's time period. So the ending of the Pygmalion provokes an interesting controversy among the critics. Higgins and Eliza do not marry in the end of a written text, while the play, as it is usually produced, often does reconcile with the main characters. Because in the end, Eliza depart, and it is being understood by the audience that finally Freddie is going to get married. On one hand, there are some people who say that if we people are talking about the myth of the Pygmalion, so the end goes in a different kind of a manner where the Pygmalion marries Gelita, that is the structure. In the similar kind of a sense, here the Pygmalion is Professor Higgin. And the kind of a thing, the sculpture which is being produced by this Professor Higgin is Eliza. Somehow he creates that structure. He makes that structure. But the end is different. Professor Higgin is a man of an age of 40, but he doesn't marry this girl, Eliza. Eliza gets married to Freddie. So that is something which, in a very different kind of a manner, Shaw has projected this play. So the structure of the play ending is to analyze the structure of a dramatic movement. So here the central situation, I will consider that the central situation and the dramatic problem is something which raises with the preparation for the ending where it has a kind of a solution. So if we people just look towards the text, so that is what we people have seen. On one hand, we have the postscript which Shaw added to the published version of Pygmalion. In it, he explained vehemently and reasonably why Eliza will never marry Higgin. On the other hand, there is a movie version which ending in which the Shaw wrote that it becomes clear to the audience that Eliza will marry Higgin. So we can speculate about Shaw's real intention, about lacking in a kind of a conclusive external evidence we should justify for condemn that the ending of the play only in relation to the text itself. Where we people are talking about the another kind of a character, and that character is something which can be considered as Alfred Doolittle. So here what we people have seen, he is the one who can be considered as Eliza's father, and his job is a kind of a dustman. He's a drunkard and elderly but vigorous, and he has a expressive voice. And this is what we people have found in later in the play, that somehow he gets a kind of a money, Alfred Doolittle, and suddenly he becomes rich. So now he doesn't belong to the lower strata of the society, but he has raised himself and he becomes a middle class merchant. He inherits the property, someone gives him his property, and that is how he raises himself from the lower class to the middle class. So that is a kind of a transition in Alfred Doolittle life, which we see where we people have seen. On the other hand, the controversy over the ending deserves. So here the ending is something which is which actually puts so many questions, and that is where some people says that whether she is going to marry Higgin or she is going to marry uh, the other person. So that is something which relates a kind of a question. So, on the other hand, there are two direct opposing interpretation of the ending, which can be based on the analysis of the characters and the situation. In one view, we people have seen that Eliza is a representative of a Shavian vitality with a vitalistic sense which is superior to Higgin, who is the prisoner of a system, particularly in his profession. Higgin and Eliza are unsuited for one another since their temperament are totally dissimilar. Another interpretation can places an emphasis on the growth of Eliza's character to a point where she is able at the end of the play to rid herself of her fear of rich. That means earlier she had a kind of a fear towards Miss Professor Higgin, but now it is no longer. Thus, no longer intimidated as a flower girl. So Eliza has no need to bargain for Higgins' affection. So, on the other hand, Eliza may be considered as less than a match for a Higgin, for her desires are the commonplace ones for a marriage and security. And where we people are talking about the another character, that is Mr. Higgin. So Mr. Higgin then is a representative of a Shavian vitality and is a true Superman, and such he is superior to Eliza. And in each interpretation of Shavian denouement, it can be justified by the critics that critics believe that marriage between the two characters would be a misalliance. For Eric Bentley has said, Eliza leaving Higgin is the outcome of the realities of the situation. So here what we people have seen. Another somewhere this is what we people have seen. There is another kind of a character, that is Mrs. Higgin. She is Henry's mother. She is very good. She's a great character, intelligent, charming, and wealthy. She accepts the people as they are. She is much more calm and she takes the control on each and every situation. She is an ideal mother. She is tolerant and she is very, very caring and very, very understanding. And on the other hand, if we just look towards Mrs. Higgin also, she is the mediator between Eliza and Higgin. So Eliza always looked forward toward Higgin, but she never got any kind of any sense from any positive kind of a remark from Higgins' side. So that is what we people have seen. So that is where we people. So Eliza just leaves that place. Eliza just leaves the house of Professor Higgin. So that is where we people can say that the criterion of realism is questionable value here. So that is the reality. Shaw is a realist, and we may classify him at all because when we people are talking about G.P. Shaw, his dramatic realism does not always call for a realistic, which can realistic means which is very very true to life ending. After all, Shaw often does marry off his heroine with heroes. But here he has presented it in a very different manner. The main heroine is someone who is not getting married to Professor Higgin. Instead of that, she opted for someone else. So that is something why his plays end with this kind of a note, that is a realistic picture that can be concerned with very true to life kind of a probability. But because he is doing to correct dramatic thing. So further, this is what we people have seen, that where we people have seen in the character of, that means where we people are talking about the criterion of realism, where valid, we would face a difficult task in trying to prove that marriage between Higgin and Eliza is hopelessly unrealistic. The two have existed in the same environment for a long time and they have grown used to one another, even reliant on one another. So they no longer very far apart in a social position. In fact, if we people are staying, if we people are saying about the Shaw also, so Shaw himself points uh, out, and Professor Bentley notes this kind of quality in the play, that their marriage would be a bad one. So, what will be more realistic than a bad marriage? So, bad marriage between these two people would have ended up into a kind of a bad end. It happens so often in a real life that one can hardly accuse an author of being a romanticist if he includes it in this kind of a play. So now, another thing, if we just look towards the another aspect, so the examination of the structure of the Pygmalion have, if we just look towards the structure of the Pygmalion, it can leave little doubt to the Shaw's ending in a very logical end. That is what we people have seen. If we just look towards in the play signifies the most direct way to the approach of the structure, and that is where it discerns what the dramatic problem of the plot is. So some of the possibilities that might have immediately to the mind concern the superficiality of the class distinction, and that is what we people have seen in the play. Just 1 minute. So that is what we people have seen, that there is a kind of a class distinction, and that class distinction is something which can be represented in a form of number one part, and that is what we people have seen, that there is a kind of a superficiality, and again, uh, the inability of Higgins to dominate Eliza's spirit, and that can be considered as a satire on a middle class morality. So that is, on the other hand, this is what we people have seen in Pygmalion, that some statement about Higgins making Eliza into a lady. So that is what we people there. That is a kind of a development which has taken. There is a kind of a development which has taken from Eliza from Act One throughout Act Fifth, and that is what we all have seen. Furthermore, the play is concerned not only with the fact of her development, but with the particular circumstances surrounding it. So there is a kind of a transformation, and that transformation is something which we people have seen, and it is up to the author, or it is up to the audience, where they have to decide whether Eliza or Higgin is the main character, for the main plot will be constructed around the action of this central character. So, if we try to put the subject of the play's action in a form of a dramatic question, we would definitely like to ask, will Eliza become a lady? The action is done either by or to Eliza, and that is what we people have seen, and that was the most interesting part. We may be certain that the passive main character does not occur in the Shaw's work. So we need to assume it. And what we people have seen, it appears that Shaw was much more interested in Eliza than in Higgin, because he explained in detail what happens to her after the play is over. Nevertheless, what about Higgin? He never asked about Higgin, he never cared. So, nevertheless, Higgin must be the main character because he manipulates the action. If we people are talking about in a comedy, it is not necessary for the main character to undergo a change or show any kind of a character development. Higgin is someone who remains the same from the first to last. To use Shaw's term, that is incorrigible. So that is what we people have seen with the character of Higgins. Eliza changes, but it is Higgin who makes her change. She is his product. So thus, the more accurate way of stating dramatic question would be, will Higgins succeed in recreating a common flower girl into a truly different person inwardly as well as outwardly? So that is what we people have seen in the play. If we just look towards, if we just trace towards the step which are leading to a logical conclusion to the Pygmalion. So this is what we people have seen. The first act is dramatically essential to the play, not merely because it introduces the character or serves a prologue, but because it begins the action, and that action is something where Higgins makes such an impression on a flower girl that she is filled with a desire of a physical improvement, her external recreation. So that is how it is being projected. Then further, when we just look towards Act 2, so Act 2, the question is realized as to whether Hagen will succeed in his experiment or not. Even though when we people are talking about the play, so play again is being divided into a kind of a traditional form of a structure, that the play is something which is being divided into a 5 act structure, and that is what happens, the climax which occurs in Act 3 and virtually resolves the question, although the question is not definitely answered, but there are certain kind of an indication that where the climax will take the spectators into which kind of a world. So that is what we people have seen. So uh, the climax lead towards that, but the Higgins success is not complete in Act 3. In Act 1, he had expressed a wish to Pickering to demonstrate the kind of a Pygmalion he could be in regard to Eliza if he had a chance. And he wanted to see this kind of a change in Eliza somehow. He wanted to see if he could have created a new human being, not merely a duchess, out of a flower girl. So that is a kind of a transformation. And the climax then only indicates his accomplishment, but does not actually show. It remains for the Act Fifth, where Act Fifth will reveal to us the full extent of the Higgins achievement. Then we see that Higgins had succeeded so well, he has turned the frightened, easily dominated Eliza into an independent woman. That he loses the prize of possession itself, and the irony of such success is evident. So, thus, this is how we people have seen that Pygmalion has created a kind of a masterpiece, a real person, and to the shore, a real person who is not dominated in a spirit by the elements of his environment. Even though in this play, the Pygmalion loses his Galita, and for that, he has recreated her with the great humanizing qualities of character. This is what we people have seen, that the independence of spirit, the independence of the vitality of the mind, that is what we people have seen. On the other hand, we it is possible to see why Shaw's ending are much more satisfying one. So there is a kind of a movie which is being made, and the name of that movie is My Fair Lady. So My Fair Lady is again a kind of a recreation of the Shaw's play. So if you people will get a kind of a chance, please do watch that movie. So that is what we people have seen, that suppose Eliza, the last line were changed from a disdain. So there is a kind of a quintessence that whether she will come back, but there is no possibility of Eliza coming back to Professor Higgin. So that is what we people have seen, that here if we people are talking about Professor Higgin, he had succeeded. And if he had succeeded, he could have taken the Eliza, that is the flower girl, the servant of the society, and he has changed her physically but not spiritually. So, in the end, this is what the people have seen, that from outside she is a changed girl, but from inside we do not know that what is there in her. So there is a kind of an arbitrary question between these kind of the people. So apart from that, again there are certain kind of the minor characters which are being presented on the play. So they are Clara Ensford Hill. So that is where again she belongs to an upper middle class. She is uh, aggressive, disrespectful, and then behaves badly. Again, she's not married, and she has not recognized that Eliza was a flower girl at first. So that is what we people have seen over here. On the other hand, we have Mrs. Ensford Hill. She is Freddie's mother, and she belongs to the upper middle class society. And same thing is there with her. She treats Freddie like a child, and she gives too much. She wants to keep up appearance, and sometimes she is the one who feels this kind of a thing, that she's ashamed of her daughter's reaction, and her hopes are shattered when her son marries Eliza, that is the poor flower girl. On the other hand, we have another minor character, and that minor character is something which can be considered as Nepomuk, and that is the old student of Higgin, and that is where we people have seen this kind of a question, that on the other hand, it can be that he also plays a very small, minor kind of a character. He thinks that Eliza is a foreigner because of her perfect accent. And even the ambassador's wife tell that Eliza is a Hungarian princess. And he is choked when he thinks that Eliza comes from a London gutter. So that is what we people have seen over here in the play. Apart from that, uh, we have another thing which is there, and that is so these are the major minor characters which I had discussed with you in a detailed manner. So apart from that, if we just look towards the textbook and the text which is being given to you, so there are so many kind of the themes which we people have seen, and this that is where the questions which will turn up in front of you is something where Pygmalion is something which can be considered as a play about the phonetics. Why the Pygmalion is a kind of a play which can be considered as a play about the phonetics? Because here in English we have no respect for the language if we are not able to teach our children how to speak. So that is what we people have seen with the Professor Higgin, as Shaw again points out in the preface, touches of sweet. And he is a brilliant but unpleasant phonetician at Oxford. So that is where even he is the one, he denounces Eliza for the speech, the woman who utters such depressing and disgusting sound, has no right to be anywhere, no right to live. So somewhere what we people can say that it is all about the kind of the mannerism, and that is something, the play is something which is which builds around the professional life of Mr. Higgins as a phonetician, and how very successfully the main content, the main action also consists of the successful attempt of Mr. Higgins to convert Eliza into a girl, into a duchess. That is a kind of a transformation. On the other hand, this play also suggests certain kind of the themes which can be considered as the class distinction, snobbery, kinds of the manners, middle class morality. That is what we people have seen in the characters of Doolittle. So that is what we people have seen, that even the kind of the snobbery which we people have seen in the opening scene itself, where Eliza protests against the social and economic snobbery by refusing to be cowed down by her social superior. And very repetitively, she speaks on one kind of a thing, that I am a good girl, so you are mistaking it. So that is what we people have seen. On the other hand, the convention of the class system, again, it is being represented over here, where we people have seen towards that the kind of the gentileness is something which is the outlook of the upper class. The mannerism is something which is there with the upper class people. The lower class are one, or the working class are the one who are deprived of each and everything. So they cannot take the position of the upper class. So that is what we people have seen, that where we people are talking about the class distinction. So the class distinction is again a kind of a question of manners and discrimination, how our behavior towards the people of different class and state and stations are. This is what we people have seen with the Higgins, that how he treats Eliza just like a dirt. So that is what we people display have reflected, and even the bad manners. There is a kind of a scene which is being represented where she is fed up with this Higgin, and in the end, what she does, she just takes her shoe and just uh, throws it towards the Higgin. So, this act of this Eliza can be considered as a kind of a class symbol, that externally you can change this girl, but in the end, she will be a servant girl at heart. So that is what we people have seen, that even though Higgins' accomplishment of recreation, so that is something which can be considered as one of the biggest development. But here, where we people are talking about a kind of a dividing between the inner development of Eliza. She is being divided into two parts, and that is the inner development and the plot structure are connected in a very separate manner. So that is how we people have seen. That means that raises a kind of the questions in front of the audience. So that is what this play is all about. Apart from that, again, this play also shows a kind of a man-woman relationship, and that is which can be considered as one of the major moral issues in the play. That means the attitude of several characters towards the opposite sex, and that is how where we people are talking about when Pickering asked Higgins that are you a man of a good character where the women are concerned? And he replies, have you ever met a man of a good character where women are concerned? So Higgins, where we people are talking about, He is confirmed bachelor who resists the erotic incursions of any women in his life. So he doesn't want to get married. And on the other hand, we can also see that there is a kind of a motherly fixation. That means Higgins' bachelorhood lies in his own motherly fixation. When Mrs. Higgins says, well, you will never fall in love under 45, will you discover that there is some rather nice looking young woman about? Her son replies, oh, I can't bother with young women. My idea of a lovable woman is something like you as possible. Again, it puts a kind of a question. He was so much his affections towards his own mother. That can also be considered as one of the reasons why he never wanted to fall in love with any other girl. So that is how uh, we have seen. On the other hand, where we people are talking about Higgin-Eliza equation. So Higgin-Eliza equation is something which can be considered as a Shavian life force theory, and that is again a very different kind of a content because this is a kind of a philosophy which is being given by G.P. Shaw, and that is very different, where he has a kind of a concept about a man and a woman, and that is where he is considering both of the opposite sex as one as a life and another one as a force, and both are very repelling kind of the forces. Both these forces have started from the evolution of the earth. So life and even the life and both the force, they want to dominate each other. So sometimes life wins and sometimes force wins. So whatever is the result is something that means which is to bring a kind of a new concept, and that new concept is like where we people are talking about a man and where we people are talking about a woman. The concept of a man is something which will take it to a kind of a different word, that is a superman. So his idea about superman is something which is very different, which is related to his life force theory. So that is all which I would like to discuss. So apart from that, another thing where we people were talking about that the structure of the Pygmalion is something which is being taken from the myth of Pygmalion and Gelita. That means Pygmalion is someone who can be considered as a king of Cyprus, and he is also a kind of a sculpture, and that is how he has created a kind of an ivory statue, which is a statue of a very lovely woman. And what happens? He fell in love with her, and finally, what he does, he requests Aphrodite, and that is the goddess of love and uh, and beauty, to transform the statue into an actual woman. And finally, both of them got married and they lived happily ever after. And in the similar manner, in Pygmalion also, this kind of an idea is something which is being recreated by Shaw, and Shaw's Pygmalion is something which is about Professor Higgins, who similarly creates his own Gelita as he transforms Eliza as a common, ignorant, sloven girl into a marvelous duchess by creating new speech for her with the help of Pickering and Mrs. Piercy. And that is how he has given her new manners and a new lifestyle. And she is his creation, his version. But this Pygmalion does not fall in love with her, and she marries someone else. And that can be considered as one of a typical Shavian twist. So that is what we people have seen, that the frame of reference is not the same, but it is something which is different. So that is how the structure develops. And I think now I would just like to wind up my lecture for now. And if you have any question, please do let me know. Yeah. So do you have any question?
Yes, ma'am. I
Yeah.
apologize for asking the question. You mentioned before that there is no respect for English. You might mean the accent and pronunciation when foreigners do. Uh, can you manifest and clarify which kind of respect for English? I didn't understand. I didn't comprehend well.
See, this is a very beautiful question which you have asked. So here we people are talking about the respect for English. See, what happens? Where I was talking about the dialects, where I'm talking about the phonetics. So phonetic again is something which is a very broad, structured form of a linguistic study. So he being Mr. Higgin is someone who is being regarded as a professor of phonetics. So that is why he is saying that being disrespectful because the girl is someone who is using because what she is doing in Act 1, this is what we people have seen that she is selling flowers to the upper class people and she is using her language in such a kind of a manner that she becomes a cockney. So that means cockney means that she is not able to pronunciate the words in a systematic manner which was being found by Professor Higgin. So that is why he is using that if someone is speaking a kind of a language, so that should be in a proper manner. So being a specialist in linguistics, so that is why he took this girl as a part of her, as a part of his own experiment, and that is how he transformed this girl into a kind of a duchess. So all the mannerism, all the proper kind of a pronunciation is something which is being reflected. On one hand, she was able to adapt. She was a very quick learner. Eliza was someone who can be considered as a very quick learner. She learned facts very quickly. She learned language very quickly. But the problem with her was that when she first encountered when she was supposed to give the test, even though she presented herself in a very confident manner, but finally, when she opened her mouth, again people mocked at her. She became a kind of a fun. And then again, she said that now I'm going to learn things in a proper manner. So that is what we people have seen that here he is saying that if you will meet a kind of a professor of a linguistic, he is very particular about the way you people are speaking. So same is there with the character of Higgins also. That means he is someone who believes that and automatically it suggests that yes, there is a kind of a class distinction that the high class or the elite class represent the proper functioning of our English language as compared to the lower class. So that is what the people have. So that is
Thank
why being disrespectful. Okay, thank you so much. Any other question? No question today? Okay, thank you so much. For yeah. So Saeed Ahmed and
Uh,
Habibullah. So you have
Thanks.
some question, yes. Okay.
No, we don't have any queries, so thanks a
You
lot.
raised your okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much,
So no
teacher.
question for okay, thank you so much for your patience. So I think today's session is complete. So in my next segment, I will be talking about the another play, and that is Uh, we will be talking about J.M. Singh's work, and the work which we people are going to discuss is the Playboy of the Western World. So we will be talking about that work. So in my next session, we will be talking about Singe. Okay, so that will be all for today. Give me 1 minute. Okay, thank you everyone. So I will be leaving the session now. So we'll be meeting you in the next session. Thank you.
Wace musulman tarbiyanaci ba ya mona ni mu da klaran ta da su duniya ke da shi